Welcome to Belkin's Growth Podcast, hosted by Michael Maximoff, co-founder and managing partner at Belkin's. Today's guest is Jennifer Caitlin Brown, head of partnerships at the Knowledge Society, former director, global business development at BioLytical Laboratories. Michael and Jennifer speak about Jen's experience selling in the B2B biotech industry, tricks and hacks she learned from her time in BioLytical Laboratories, and how she uses this experience to build partnerships at the Knowledge Society. Enjoy listening, and don't forget to subscribe for more episodes.
You guys are one of the best in this space, so that's why we are in this call.
And then if it's relevant at all, I spent 5 years in biotech as well. And in infectious diseases and HIV, which was definitely much more of the traditional sales aspect.
Were you in the sales and marketing team in there?
I joined the organization when there was just two of us in the sales and marketing department. So we got to build it, and then I stayed on, she left. So I got to build it from the ground up, from all the marketing, the customer service, the sales, everything was done. I did all of that. And I spent half my time actually in the US for several years building launching the product there. And then eventually actually built a sales team that was US based, and then moved to Europe, where I actually launched the product in retail version, like the retail version of the HIV test in pharmacies in Europe and distribution channels in sub-Saharan Africa. That was actually pretty interesting as well.
Yeah,
and especially with COVID now and rapid test, I feel like people are learning more about infectious diseases and rapid testing, and they're educating themselves in that kind of, in those terms that no one knew what, the general public didn't know what things like prevalence was and sensitivity, specificity. But now with COVID, they're getting really educated in it. And HIV was exactly the same. Like the rapid tests that they're promoting nowadays for COVID are exactly the same platform as we were using for HIV. That might be of interest as well.
This is great. So, let's start with this one, okay? You piqued my interest there. So HIV testing. So what was the company name? Remind me.
BioLytical Laboratories.
BioLytical Laboratories. And you said that you started joined the company when there was just two of you in the sales team and customer support team?
Sales, marketing. Yeah, everything sales and marketing. I mean, we were at a conference, for example, and people are like, oh, wow, like that's a great, it's a great poster and great banner that you made. Oh yeah, we made that. Those are my fingers getting tested in the photo. Oh, great. So if I have to, order a product, who do I call? Us. Okay, if I want to train my team, who do I call? That's still us. What about, it was like literally all us. It was a lot of fun.
You were wearing many hats, right? So you joined the company when it was like on a very early stage, like a seed round. How many people were in total in the company?
Yeah, so I joined the company when it was about 5-6 years old. And all of that time before was on product development and regulatory approvals. Yeah. So the team was about 30 people or so, and it was all scientists and production people. And then we had just received our FDA approval, Health Canada, CE mark, and then a little bit later received our WHO approval. So we basically had the license to sell when I joined.
Got it. And the product was like an HIV test, or what was sort of like the unique value proposition back then?
HIV test in 60 seconds.
Oh, okay. And who did you cater this product to?
So initially it was a point of care test, which means someone that is delivering healthcare services. It doesn't necessarily need to be a doctor, not even a nurse. In the US, it was actually community-based organizations that we mostly sold to. These community-based organizations were located at the heart of where the problem was in different communities, and going out and testing people out in the field. And so they were often volunteers or people that were working specifically, they were trained specifically to just provide testing and counseling to people for HIV. And we did do a few hospitals, and we did sell to the state healthcare, state government. Oh my God, now it's been a few years. I'm losing my terms, but the state health departments. So they were a big client as well. And then they would distribute the tests to these programs that would go out and test people. But then of course, when I moved to Europe, then we actually sold to retail pharmacies. And that version of the product, people could actually test themselves in the privacy of their own home. Basically like a pregnancy test, but with blood instead. So really everything that people are talking about with COVID these days, and the company actually, I'm no longer there, of course, but the company has developed on the same 60-second platform, a self-test for COVID. So it's the same concept as well. So that one can be sold. I imagine they will sell it can't speak on their behalf anymore, but I imagine they would be selling it online or retail pharmacies, wherever they can get it in the hands of the people.
Can you imagine the timing, right? When you've been developing the tech for like 6 years and you had everything in place and then COVID happened and then you just can change the algorithm, but you have the same production process you had for HIV and then you're just selling that. The timing is for the founders, for the investors, basically, right? The timing is amazing. And when you start, again, you mentioned that you were one of the first joining the sales and marketing team and client support team. So you basically were running the B2B sales team, let's say, you're right. So it was because selling to communities as well as to hospitals or pharmacies in Europe, that's like the B2B sales, right? And you didn't have a biotech experience before joining the company.
I had no sales experience and no biotech experience. I was actually hired as an assistant initially. So I was hired as an assistant to support the other person that was the one person in the sales and marketing team. But within 2 weeks, we realized, wow, there's so much to be done. The timing is really good. The market is ready. We were even getting inbound already from word of mouth. And so they put me to work right away in sales. They just sent me out in the field. My first trip was to Atlanta, Georgia. And I met with the Center for Disease Control and I met with a local team there that was doing HIV tests. And I just got thrown into the deep end. And all of a sudden I was just, reading as much as I could before going on the trip. I was asking our CTO a million questions. He was so patient because I knew absolutely nothing about infectious disease. I knew nothing about the US healthcare system. And so I just bombarded him with a million questions, then just admitted when I didn't know things. So, if they had questions that I didn't know the answers to, and a lot of these were very technical and a lot of very scientific, I would just say, great question, let me get back to you. And I would make sure to actually note all those questions down and get back to them. And in fact, I closed one of our biggest clients on that first trip, which was really, really lucky. So yeah, just getting thrown into the deep end.
How did you get those first meetings booked for you? You mentioned, is it like the inbound interest coming to you guys or like word of mouth? You didn't do any active lead generation back then for those first clients, or you did?
We were really lucky. Those first few ones, they were actually inbound. This is another indication that we were so ready to actually develop a sales team. Is we actually had people that wanted to buy a product, but no one was servicing them, which is a really, really good position to be in. Of course, a little bit different because we've been developing the product for so long. Perhaps a few of them had heard about it. But those were the low-hanging fruit. But I have to admit that very shortly after that, once we were able to get to those first few calls, it was a lot of cold outreach after that. So we had a few inbound that we were lucky to start with, and a few friendlies that we were lucky to start with. But after that, I've never done so much cold outreach in my entire life. But it'd be just like we would pick, I would pick an area. So let's say I would get one inbound curious person inquiring from, say, Delaware. And all of a sudden I would say, okay, let's look at Delaware. And I would pull up, go online, search who's in Delaware, who is offering HIV tests. And we were very lucky that information is very public with HIV because they want to encourage people getting tested. You can actually very luckily access exactly which clinics are offering the test, exactly which test they're offering. So you know exactly which competitive product they're using. So you can go to the call very ready. And I was essentially called all of them one by one and say, hey, I'm coming to Delaware. We're from Canada, blah, 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 blah. And there was this forcing function because it's time bound. I'm coming there for 2 days these days. And it was amazing having that forcing function, how many people would actually take us up on the offer, to go visit them. And then what always sold it was demonstration. So I had samples. I wouldn't obviously test people for HIV, but I had samples that would allow me to actually perform the test with kind of like imitation blood, if you will. And being able to see that result in 60 seconds just blew them away. And that was definitely an easier product to sell than most. I've sold services since, and that is way more challenging when you don't actually have a 60-second demo to wow them. So yeah, we did a lot of B2B, a lot of cold calling, a lot of emailing, but mostly I would just get on the phone, get them on the phone, and book them right then and there. I'm coming in 2 days.
That's a great approach, actually. I mean, we've used that multiple times so far, and I love especially the follow-ups that you can send afterwards when you already like that. You book some calls, you're already flying into, let's say, Delaware, and then you send a follow email saying that, hey, I am just landed in Delaware. I have 2 p.m. tomorrow freed up for you. I want to stop by your office. Your address is this, correct? And this works like magic, right? Because you always can book those extra slots in your calendar from the folks that were not interested before. But now, because you create that sort of like, time sensitive one-off offer, they really love that. And that works really well. And we've done that multiple times for the customers. And it's funny because we've done those campaigns like a few weeks in advance when you sort of like starts with, hey, I'll be there. I have a few options. Then you send some follow-ups, some phone calls. And then during those first few days, bombard with the extra few follow-ups to get those 50% of the calendar booked, basically. So this is great. Have you had any other tricks doing this that you can, remember or have on top of your mind?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Lots, many, many, many. Because we were so small and scrappy and we didn't have, I don't even know what the term is because we didn't have them back then, as the sales development, the BDRs or something like this, right? The people that actually do the footwork for you. And we didn't have a marketing team. We didn't have any of that. So it was very, very scrappy. So another thing that I would do is once someone would agree to see me, or they wanted, a lot of these organizations actually wanted a training on the product. And so I would say, no problem. I would be happy to come to the training. It takes about a couple hours. Do you know any other organizations in the area that would benefit from this training as well? And so because it was very luckily a very collaborative community, not always everywhere and not all the time, but generally within the HIV community, it was very collaborative. And so they would say, oh yeah, Jim and Bob and Susan down the road, they would love to hear about the product. So they would actually sometimes invite other organizations to participate in the training. And so I've learned about these few organizations and they're doing the work for me. They're the ones actually inviting them. B, I get value for my time because now all of a sudden in those 2 hours, I get to introduce the product to multiple potential clients. And then I would make sure to make the training really, really good, really, really engaging. I would ask lots of questions. I would make sure that they're paying attention and that they're understanding the concepts. And I would I would actually bring Canadian maple cookies. And it's so silly, but because I had no money for swag, I had no money for fancy marketing things. I would literally, every time my routine, I would go to the airport, I would stop by the duty free, I would load up on maple cookies and I would show up. And it was such a novelty for them, right? Because here I am in the US and they've never tasted these maple cookies. And, I'm biased, but I've heard they're better than Oreos. So they were quite the hit. And the moment I remember knowing how this small thing had such a big impact is I was at a conference and there was this huge state health department that I was really, really wanted as a client. The competitor was actually based in that state. So as you can imagine, it was a bit of a funny competitive thing to be able to take the competitor's own backyard. And the person, the decision maker actually came by the booth and said, hey, do you have any of those maple cookies again? I was like, absolutely. For you, I've got endless maple cookies. And then I got the opportunity to talk again, right? So it's just these silly little things that don't need much money and they don't need much investment. And the best advice that I ever got is sell what you have, right? So at the time, all I had was my product that I could demo, my maple cookies and my smile. And that's all I had. I didn't, I could complain that I didn't have fancy brochures, that I didn't have this, that I didn't have that, or you just sell what you've got, right? Do what you can with what you've got. Sure, eventually we did manage to, have a marketing person, develop collateral and have all these things, but those can just be excuses for salespeople. Oh, I'm not selling because I don't have this brochure, or I don't have this, or I don't have this swag, or I don't have whatever it is. You can make it happen. You shouldn't need all those things. Great if you have those tools, but as long as you have a solid pitch and you have your personality and your excitement and maybe a little thing like some little thing that you can afford to do, like the cookies, then that's all you should really need to get going.
That's funny because that's the only way the great things are being born, right? When you are put behind the wall and you just need to hustle basically, right? And create
Yeah.
things that never did before. Yeah, this is great. And you mentioned that you've been flying out and visiting different venues, conferences, not necessarily a meeting face to face, right? And remind me, when was that? That was like 17, 18, or what was the year you've
The
been doing
years
this?
of
Yeah, the year of you doing this.
That's a great question. That was 3 years ago, and I was there for nearly 5 years. I'm not doing the math very well here, but 2013 to
Oh, okay.
2017.
People back then, they didn't do that many Zoom calls, right? And they didn't do a lot of
Right.
conference calls. And you cannot just land a deal by talking in person on the phone. You need to meet with them personally. Is that the case with the biotech industry? The question here is that if you compare the approach that you had to sales back then with what we have right now, where everyone and everything is online, did you leverage your online channels as well to close deals, or that was super difficult, so you need to get to the location and meet with people face to face most of the time, and you couldn't land the deal without being there personally?
We actually did leverage online tools. And the reason we did is we were finding that people really enjoyed meeting in person and they wanted the in-person trainings and they wanted you to come and spend time. But at the time, there was literally two of us to cover the entire United States. When I remember meeting my first competitor in person, and we were at a conference and it was this small room and they had invited all four products to be there. So the big competitor that had most of the market, they came up to me and they were like, "Oh, nice to finally meet you guys, blah, blah, blah." And they're like, "We hear you guys have hired an army of salespeople." And I remember thinking with pride, right? Wow, if me and my colleague are an army of salespeople, we're really making an impact, which is really
Yeah.
cool. But we had such a big territory to cover where these competitors had tons of salespeople actually going in person and spending that time in person, that we were finding we just couldn't be as effective if we had to go in person to all these places. I mean, we had a period of time where we toured like 20 states in 2 months. Like it was
Wow.
crazy. And what we were finding is some of these places were just unfortunately not large enough potential customers for us to use our valuable time. I mean, we just had so little time left that we couldn't go see everyone. And so we actually did started offering online webinars. And at this point, then we had started to hire a couple more people on the team to support us. And so we had actually tasked out to one of our team members to do these online webinars. And that was really, really a huge time saver, is being able to initially do one-on-one, but eventually we realized we could actually even group people together. So we would group a few organizations and get our colleague to actually do an online webinar. And then once they were excited and ready to close, then we would take over from there. But it was a great resource. And unfortunately, because of regulatory compliance, we couldn't do those. We couldn't pre-record the trainings because we did have to actually evaluate them and make sure that they've actually understood the protocols and everything, how to do the test. So we couldn't pre-record those, but being able to outsource that to a colleague, being able to group people together was really, really time effective. And then if we happened to be in their area, sure, we would go pay a visit to make sure to build that relationship. It was very effective actually to do these online webinars, and we got really good at how to do them and how to make sure that they stay engaging. How do we make sure that they're understanding what we're doing? I mean, as you can imagine with HIV, it's very highly regulated. It's a big deal when someone is not using the product properly, not just a matter of, oh, who cares? It's like, it's someone's life at stake. So yeah, we managed to actually do, I guess it wasn't Zoom back then, it was Skype, but I can only imagine that now, a few years later, it would be even better to be able to do these things online. It is very effective.
And how did you get people to visit the webinars? So it's basically the same tool, like just instead of your call to action be, hey, let's visit, hey, there's a webinar, please join the link. And then once they joined and they were interested in learning more, then you follow up with them more personally, and then you get on the call or just sort of like qualify them more. And then webinar was basically like a sales tool for you. Okay. Exactly. What are the other types of content you guys created back then that were, like value bombs for you and that brought some good results? I'm asking because, there is so much content that you can create, but not so much that you can use as a sales or marketing tool effectively to bring results. So have you been doing other type of content?
Yeah, absolutely. We did one kind of campaign that we did, which was a lot of fun, was for National HIV Testing Day. I think that was in 2014. We actually put together these fabulous packages for people to help them promote their own HIV testing day at their clinic. So we put together these series of posters. Some were educational, some were about our product. Of course, they had our logo everywhere, but they were fun and they were either informative or they were fun and humorous, which is tricky to do with HIV, but we managed to pull it off. And we had stickers and we had basically this little swag bag that, again, we were very scrappy. We literally hired like our friend's brother to do the graphics and we printed them ourselves. And we had the entire company, even the CEO, packing these boxes with us. And we shipped them to, oh gosh, it must have been 200 locations or something. And people loved them. They were going crazy for them. They were hashtagging, they were putting up the posters and taking photos. So it wasn't content per se, but it was such a great marketing tool to get people talking about us. There was no social media person back then in our company, at least, but it was our first foray into kind of leveraging that. We didn't unfortunately have the opportunity or time or resources to write blogs or do this, which I think would be really helpful nowadays. I would imagine I would probably take the time and put in the effort to develop that if I were to do it right now, because it's such there's so much to learn about HIV and testing and our product and industry. There is a lot that you could potentially talk about and inform people about, and people are going online and looking to inform and educate themselves more and more about their own health. And so I could imagine that would be a great way to generate leads for sure.
Got it. And then you started selling to Europe, right? To pharmacies. How was it different from selling to the US? Was it any different with regards to your approach or the way you communicated the value proposition? Again, if you remember anything from that time.
My goodness, Europe is a whole different ballgame. I was continuing to sell to the same type of organization, to community-based organizations, to governments. So I'll talk about that. And then I also started selling B2C, so selling actually to retail, which is a whole different ballgame. But the first thing that I learned is I think we have a fallacy in North America of kind of grouping Europe all as one, right? You're like, oh, Europe, the EU, everything is harmonized and you have your license to sell to all of Europe because of the EU and whatever, and you get your CE mark and you get your approval to sell there. That couldn't be further from the truth. Not only from a regulatory aspect where each country, yes, a product could have a CE mark, but a country can still have their own veto power. So they might decide that you're allowed to sell your product or not, depending on what they decide in their own government. And even within that, Spain, for example, that's where I moved. I moved to Barcelona. I figure I'd take one for the team, living in Barcelona. But I moved to Spain to be my base. Spain alone had 17 separate health authorities. And so not only did I have to get the European approval, but then I had to get the Spanish approval, and then I had to get an approval for that region, and then, so on and so forth. So, and that's just from the regulatory aspect alone. On top of that, you had the different ways to do business culturally, which was fascinating. I mean, each country was totally different in Europe. And even within a country, it was totally different doing business within that country in different regions. Whether it's for France, I got to leverage my French speaking skills. So I had to speak French in France, which was really interesting. I remember one time my boss actually was, hey, I'll fly over to Europe and we can divide and conquer. I can take these meetings in Paris. And I'm like, well, you might have some success, but you might have some difficulty as well. And he's like, no, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. And he was actually American at the time. We had just hired him as a commercial person because we were, getting bigger. And so I hired my own boss, if you can believe it. He was fantastic. Right. And he came back and he was like, I don't know what I was thinking I could do business in France, not speaking a word of French. So there's those kind of examples. And that's pretty unique for France. I would say most other places in Europe, you can definitely get away with English, but every country was so unique and it was so nuanced. And so I would say I basically took my whole, book of tricks, if you will, and just threw it all away. And I had to start all over in Europe and take the time to learn that culture, take the time to understand what works for them. Do they want to spend more time in person, or do they want to be very efficient? Is this Germany where you have an agenda and you stick to it? Or is this, Ukraine where they want to take you out for lunch and hang out and spend the day with you, right? It's very, very unique everywhere. And so it was just about being aware of that and listening and just, reflecting how they want to do business. I would say was my biggest learning from Europe. And at the same time, I was doing Sub-Saharan Africa, and that was exactly the same as well. I mean, you really had to be ready to go to their family's home that night and have dinner with them, because for them, it was about building that relationship, and it took time and there was no rush. And, you in a North American way, you want to go in, have the meeting, sell, and get out. But you couldn't do that. You couldn't schedule, 10 meetings in a day. You just had to understand that this is, they're going to want to get to know you and they're going to welcome you so warmly, but it's going to take time. The last thing I would mention about Europe is selling commercially to retail pharmacies. Mm-hmm. I had to learn something totally new. And what I learned there was that marketing is so important. We were not equipped to be super effective selling to the retail channels in Europe because we didn't have a big marketing department. We had one person who was a rock star who was coming up with all these things, but these retail pharmacies, they wanted to know who your team was, which agency are you using, how much are you spending? They want to know all these things for you to actually get that contract. So it was very, very interesting to learn. I ended up hiring a team, a company that actually did the calls. So I hired a whole call center to actually be the ones to call all these pharmacies, because in the UK, you have Boots that you could get one big contract, but in the rest of the continental Europe, all these pharmacies were individually owned. Right. So yes, you could talk to the kind of umbrella company, but then you still had to, and they wanted to know what your marketing was. But then at the end of the day, you actually had to call on each individual pharmacy. So it's just a whole different world. I mean, I couldn't have done it alone in the same way that I was doing it in the US. And so I had to, again, scrap the whole book of how I launched in the US and start all over for that market.
You hired an agency doing calls for you. Did they were doing calls in their local language for each location, or yes? So that's sort of international approach, basically. Okay.
Yes, exactly. So they actually had the whole list of pharmacies. They had, the phone number, who to talk to. They called on these people often, and they did in the local language, and they knew, how to answer their questions. But then I had to still go and train them on the product and train these call centers on, why they should be excited selling this product, and why, what are the main objections that we normally get, and make sure that they're really, really well trained so that they can be effective. Because the message, when you're playing the game of telephone like that, where you have a lot less control over the end messaging, making sure that, again, those trainings are really, really, really solid helped a lot. And a lot of repetition, a lot of keeping things really simple so it stays in their minds, and they really memorized it, not just reading a script, and they're excited about it as well. That's what I found is the more I could get the call centers excited about it genuinely, then the better the results were.
This is great. This is an excellent advice for folks that are hiring outsource or any, partners that do that. The more people excited, selling your product or service, the higher results you can yield with them. So this is great. So going back to, selling in Europe specifically, I know that my team have had some challenges doing some appointment in France. And you mentioned that you've been actively calling and having meetings in France, and because you're from Quebec, and I know that in Quebec you have a bit different French, the accent is totally different. So sometimes people don't understand each other speaking French. Have you had learning French all over again?
Yes, I have learned French over again in a way. Absolutely. So I lived in Quebec until I was 14. And then after that, from 14 onwards, and I've got 20 years now since then, I've actually mostly spoken with French people from Europe. Yes, I still interact with Québécois, and I still speak je peux parler en québécois, là, c'est vraiment comme ça, là. But mostly, generally, for the past 20 years, I've used my French more abroad and with Europeans and things like that. So I've actually somehow managed to speak in a more European French. Alors, on parle comme ça, et voilà, c'est un peu plus doux. And so I managed to actually speak in a way that is more agreeable to the folks from France. Yeah, if I were to turn on my Quebecois accent really, really hard, they would understand, of course, but they would have a good laugh.
Are there any tricks up your sleeve right now, generating appointments or doing business with French people? Any specifics that you can recommend right now? Because again, my team have had hard time doing that in France. People just don't answer emails, don't pick up the phone, don't get on the meetings. So are there any secrets that we can use to be effective on that market?
I think, well, two things. They like to say no a few times first. So they I find that that's kind of part of the process. So not to be disheartened by it, because that's just kind of part of the process for some reason. Warm introductions are huge. And I know that's hard when you're supposed to be cold calling and that's your job, is to make them warm. I found that I got a lot of success through getting those warm introductions, or maybe even establishing credibility some other way. Do they know someone else have they used something else that you've used? Some kind of point of commonality that can establish that credibility if you can't get an introduction, which of course is ideal. In an ideal world, you get an introduction, but of course it's not always possible. But do you have something else in common? Do you have some other way to establish credibility? The reputation or the credibility seems to be a little bit more important, I find.
Got it. This is great. And then, so Jennifer, going to the time when you start working for TKS, right? So it's totally different, right? That was like biotech, B2B world. This is B2C basically, right? Because you were dealing with students directly. And in 2 words, if I summarize TKC value proposition, is it like a platform? Is it a community? Is it like an education program? What is it?
I would choose 3 words: innovation program, like a educational program, but also a community. Those are the 2 big things. And what it is in short, we call it an accelerator for ambitious, curious and ambitious teenagers. And yes, the main thing that we're selling is a program for them. It's a, after school program, if you will, but it's very intense. The best comparison that I can make is comparing it to a sport. So let's say a young person is very, very ambitious and shows promise in a sport, let's say swimming. They will go to school, sure, during the day, but their main priority, their number 1 priority outside of school is swimming. So they're at the swimming pool 5-6 days a week. They're getting the best coaches. They're putting in the time, and they're probably part of some community with it or whatnot. And so TKS, or the Knowledge Society, is an Olympic level training ground for innovation. So these young people are going to school like regular teenagers, but outside of school, they are constantly working on building machine learning algorithms, on building their website, on putting out a newsletter, on being part of this TKS community where they're meeting other ambitious teenagers and maybe building projects together. They're learning how to do public speaking. And, I had a chance before COVID to be traveling the world with these young kids, to speak at Web Summit, to speak at CES, to speak at South by Southwest. And it's absolutely incredible to see them on stage talking about technology, but doing it in a way that's personable and excited and knowledgeable. And so, yes, it's a program, but it's so much more than that.
This is amazing. Are you catering this program and selling it directly to students or to their parents? So who your ideal customer profile, if I may ask here?
Great question. Yeah. And so first of all, because it's mostly on marketing's plate to sell the program, and then I end up doing really cool things with partners. So my role specifically that
was my second question, basically. So I was like, okay, so how does the director of partnerships and corporate development work into this picture, and what is the area of your responsibilities?
Exactly. So my responsibility, luckily, is not necessarily selling the program, but for the rest of the team that is in charge of that. And I have had some part with participating or partnering with certain organizations that can promote the program to their audiences. And sure, that's definitely a channel that we've leveraged. But to answer your question, generally, depending on the age, you're sometimes selling to the student and sometimes selling to the parent. And actually, we have a younger program that's called, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank right now. But the younger program is, foundation. That's right. Because it's the foundational blocks. I'm not involved, really in that program, but because it is a younger program, 13 to 15, 12, as young as 10, they're often selling to the parent. And then with the main core program, it's kind of like 13, the youngest, but generally 15, 16, 17. So you're really targeting the student. But like I said, the marketing team generally takes care of that. With partnerships, what's really, really fun about doing partnerships for the Knowledge Society is that I essentially get to create opportunities for these young people. And what I mean by that is partnering with conferences to get them to speak, and having a 12-year-old on stage, sharing the stage with world experts at some of these tech conferences is really, really cool to see. It's partnerships with companies like Microsoft and Zappos and Airbnb to actually get problems for these young people to solve. And so we actually go to these companies and figure out what's a problem that you're trying to solve right now that is a top business priority problem, not just, making up some cute hackathon pretend problem, something that if there was a solution for or a good recommendation, this could actually change your business. And so these top companies in the world are opening their kimonos and telling us what their main problems are, giving us some data, giving us some information about it. And then these teenagers actually go and solve these problems. They spend a month in teams working on these problems. They do research. They're cold calling places. They're doing their in-field research. They're building technology for, kind of like MVPs. They're doing this, spending tons and tons of hours on this for a full month, and then put together a McKinsey level style deck. And this deck is their recommendation, their research backing up why they recommend this, what research they did, blah, 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 blah. And the companies are so blown away that they've actually implemented some of these recommendations.
Wow.
And Airbnb actually flew down one of the teams to San Francisco to meet one of the co-founders because they were so impressed with what these kids had to say about solving some of these problems. So I get to talk to the top companies in the world to do these type of things. And then we get to help kids as well by partnering with companies who want to provide scholarships, because a lot of the students that we work with are not necessarily from privileged backgrounds.
Right.
Curiosity and ambition comes from anywhere. You don't have to be someone that has been given everything in life to have that innate curiosity, to have that innate ambition. And so a lot of the kids that we work with, at least a third, if not more in certain cities, are not able to pay for such a program. And so we get to partner with companies that want to support the next generation and provide them scholarships to be a part of this program. And the costs aren't huge at the end of the day, but it's huge for a family, right? It's any extra dollar for some families is a big deal. But then the value that they get out of a program like TKS, where all of a sudden their kid that was asking a million questions and that was always looking for more to do and thinking they wanted to sink their teeth into more things, they have somewhere to go every day if they want to, right? Every day right now online, they could be talking to other kids. They can be talking to their city directors, to their mentors. They can be building things. They've learned how to reach out to experts. So they can be constantly occupied and by these challenges and these problems to solve and technology to build and things to learn. And so for some of these parents, especially ones that are on scholarship, it's just life-changing for them because they didn't know what to do with that super curious kid that they had, and they couldn't afford any other programs. So that's another great way that we partner with people.
How many kids do you have right now in the program?
So I think we're up to 700 now.
700
so we've
kids.
Got quite a few. Yeah, we've got quite a few. So last year we finished with nearly 500 between 5 different cities. So we were in Toronto, in New York, in Boston, Las Vegas, and Ottawa. And we just expanded this year also to Los Angeles and virtually.
It's not only virtually. You need to be on the ground with the kid, kind of have on-site classes with them as well, right? Got it.
Yeah. So initially it was only in person because of that community aspect. So because of the community aspect was so huge, And we would, take the students to tour Uber's office, or we would have games night, or we would have stand-up comedy night to build their confidence. All these things built the community and really kept the young people engaged. And so it's very, very much in person. But of course, we're having to reinvent that, which is now opening up all kinds of doors, because now with the virtual program, which was just launched this month, we have young people whose lives are being changed all around the world. There was, a kid in Syria and a kid in, all over the world that they don't have anything like this where they are. And they're perhaps very lonely in their interests, right? They're not like their peers. And so for them to all of a sudden get plugged into a community of like-minded young people that think it's also cool to learn about quantum computing is life-changing for them.
Yeah. And do these eminent companies reached out to you directly about offering a scholarship or a program, or you still do some cold outreach and you kind of promote this to them as well?
A little bit of both. We're very lucky now that because we are starting to get exposure, and, we might say, for example, when we could still travel, we'd be at Web Summit in Lisbon, and all of a sudden you have an executive that's in the audience that sees a 16-year-old talking about cellular agriculture, and they're like, wow, we need to get involved with these young people and with this program. So we did start getting interest like that from that exposure, but definitely still lots of outbound outreach. And it was tricky. It's tricky with this because it's not easy to explain what the program is. People might think, oh, it's a cute after-school program, right? And not really understanding how serious and intense and life-changing and all-encompassing this program is. So it's really hard to capture that in one sentence. And then secondly, even if they do understand that, what I hear from people afterwards, once we do get to know them, is, well, it was too good to be true. I didn't actually believe that these 16-year-olds are interested in machine learning and are excellent public speakers and are doing this and doing that and doing that. They actually have to meet some of the students. And so all of a sudden, my product demo was actually them meeting students, which is strange, right? When normally with my HIV test, I would go and show them the test. With this I had to have an opportunity to get them in front of the students. And then that's when these partners would understand, oh, this is not some regular after-school program, and these are not your average teenagers. And so that was much easier in person, much easier at conferences, much easier, when we could be at, say, Uber's office to do an office tour. And then all of a sudden you have these kids asking really good questions to their data scientists and to the other people. And then all of a sudden that company's like, yeah, we need to support this program. But now with COVID and everything being, Zoom, email, it's been a new challenge now, having to find ways of really getting good at explaining what the program is and getting really good at providing examples of students, of projects that they're doing, of, really finding ways to wow the potential partners without having the student in front of them, which is frankly the best way of doing it, but that's not always possible now.
Yeah. When we were talking about the biotech business, it seemed, like biotech being a super sophisticated industry, it still, seemed more simpler with regards to how you can sort of do things like you have a product, you have a customer, you sell the product to the customer, you have some channels, you do that. But while you were explaining this, that is so encompassing with regards to how many things you can do with this and where you are and all these moving parts that are in it. So I think that we would probably spend a few more hours for me just to getting the glimpse of not just the business, but in general, the operation, right? I know that we have a few minutes left here. So wanted to ramp this up with this. You mentioned that you're teaching kids a lot of different, not specifically hard skills, but also soft skills, right? Like you work with the team, how you coordinate, how you present yourself, how you pitch, how you collect data, all of that, and how you manage to sort of to package all of that into a program or, learn all of that. Do you have tutors that you hire that are in-house, professionals that are teaching children all of this, or you have external partners that come in and they have a sort of program? For example, you work with, with this company or with this institute about this, like, psychology in the group. And then they kind of contribute with their work to some of that, to kind of to be a part of this global movement sort, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. No, yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And it's a question that we get often, right? Because they're seeing, wow, these kids are, knowledgeable in nanotechnology and public speaking and this and that. How do you do it? Do you get guest speakers? How do the young people access this content? And the answer is there is so much of this that's available online nowadays. What we're doing is actually being more of a guide to these young people. So we're not spoon feeding content. So we don't need our content to be perfect. We don't need an expert in quantum computing to come and teach that part of it. We're just guides, and we're exposing these young people to a lot of these topics. We're giving them feedback. We're giving them resources, but a lot of it is actually self-directed. So these young people are actually, once they get exposed to a topic that's interesting to them, they're the ones that actually goes and they go and research it, and which is really cool. So we're teaching, that expression, give a man a fish to eat for one day, teach them how to fish. So really the program is actually teaching them how to teach themselves how to fish, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we're giving them the general framework, the general direction, the way of thinking. Why should you care about these things? Why should you want to learn how to build a website? Here are some examples of some good ones. Now you go figure it out. And there's no homework. This isn't school. You're not getting a grade. You're not, you don't have to do it. So we explain to them why they should want to care and how they should go about figuring it out. But at the end of the day, it's all intrinsic. They are motivated themselves to do it. And they really deeply learn because they're figuring it out for themselves.
Yeah.
Of course, when they get a block or they can't figure out something, then they come back to the city director, and the city director has enough knowledge that they can kind of push them through those initial stages. But at the end of the day, some of the students that are building some of these technologies are far more knowledgeable now than the city directors, right? They've become true experts in some of these fields. I mean, frankly, we have a student that just raised millions of dollars from Silicon Valley investors and has a team of 13 now and has an office in Boston. And he, of course, is far more knowledgeable in nanotechnology that he's specializing in than anyone that's part of the team. And I think that's one of the challenges with education nowadays is it hasn't evolved to really reflect what we have at our fingertips these days, right? You don't need a textbook anymore. You shouldn't be just memorizing things, for questions that the answers at the back of the textbook.
Right.
That's not actually preparing you for the real world. In the real world, people want you to figure out answers to problems that there is no answer. You can't just that's where the true value is figuring stuff out. It's not just memorizing things. It's not just, regurgitating the answer that everyone else has as well. It's here's the problem. How resourceful can you be? And how can you figure this out and persevere and have the grit to actually go through with it and be frustrated and know that you can't figure it out and do things like, we teach the young people how to reach out to an expert, right? We don't give them all the mentors. We actually say, once you've actually reached that level where we can't help you anymore and you need to actually talk to a machine learning worldwide expert, here's how you approach that, right? Here's how you cold outreach to that person. And we explain to them, hey, you write to them about, hey, I'm a 16-year-old. I'm really excited about machine learning. This is what I've done. Check out these blogs that I've written. This is what I've actually been working on. Here's the problem. Here's where I'm stuck. And here's what I tried to do to solve. Imagine being in-demand expert and you get that outreach from a 16-year-old and you see the work that they've put in and you see that they're not just saying, hey, give me the answer. I mean, it's absolutely incredible the response that they'll get. Way better than us actually going out and getting those excerpts for them. And then that relationship is genuine and they truly have built a true mentor within that person.
Perfect. Listen, Jennifer, this is great. This is really great. Before I let you go here, one last thing. For those that are listening to this episode with you, the one call to action or the message that you wanted to share with the audience, what should they do after listening to this? Should they go and talk to their kids to sign up for the program, or they should share this internally and talk to their colleagues of some corporate companies or the people that can help you with other partnerships? What is that sort of like the only message that you wanted to pass for people to do after listening to this?
Absolutely. Go to tks.world, TKS, the Knowledge Society.world, and one or the other. We would love both. If you have a young person that you know, whether your own kid or someone else, your niece or nephew, that has that, is always asking a million questions, is very curious, wants to change the world, come and check out the program. Now that we're offering a virtual program, I mean, we just launched now, but check out, sign up for next year. Now that we have a virtual program, anyone from around the world can actually be a part of this program, which is really cool. So check out tks.world. If you are part of a company that is solving some really cool problems that are focused on innovation, please do reach out to go to the website as well, check out the partnership page and reach out, because we would love to partner with you. We would love for you to have a taste of working with the next generation of leaders.
Great, Jennifer. Well, please, folks that listening to this, do that. Either or both would work. Jennifer, I appreciate you taking the time and joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jennifer. We're going to have one more episode coming for the season 1 of the Belkin's Growth Podcast. It's coming in the next few weeks. I had a great chat with Mr. Sean Ellis, the father of Growth Podcast. Sean and I touched base on some really valuable tips and tricks and insights for you guys to tap into. Stay tuned for my final episode with Sean. Then we're going to take a short break until after the holidays and to prepare great content for season 2. It's been a year actually since we started this, and your feedback was super valuable for us. Stay tuned for my episode 25 with Mr. Sean Ellis talking about growth hacking, and I'll see you in the new year. Cheers.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Belkin's Growth Podcast and found it useful. Be sure to subscribe and catch upcoming episodes on iTunes and Stitcher.